Hands down, the most common question I get about cold calling is this one: should I leave a voicemail? I hear it from sellers I coach in field, from students attending my sales course at UC Berkeley, from both experienced and new hire sales reps who attend my training programs. They all ask, should I leave a voicemail? Well, we'll get to that. But first, I want to give you 20 cold calling tips in 20 minutes. These aren't likely to be the same old tips you've heard before. There are plenty of resources available for the basics. In fact, I've compiled a list of great resources for you. You can find it in the attachment section of your Bright Talk screen, so be sure not to leave without it. But these tips, these lightning speed tips that I'm about to give you, they're from a people-first perspective. Putting people first is what we do. After all, every sale starts with a connection, a person. Cold calling, it seems like it has a tendency to overlook that critical factor. But before we dive in, let me properly introduce myself. I'm Deb Calvert, author of the bestseller Discover Questions Get You Connected and of the award-winning blog Connect to Sell. I train and coach salespeople and sales managers about establishing and maximizing connections with buyers, and I conduct research with buyers to understand what they want from sellers. Speaking of connections, please connect with me on LinkedIn or Twitter or Google+. You'll see my handle on screen along with my email address. And I want to tell you that I also work in the leadership space as an executive coach. See, it's those two disciplines, sales and leadership, that converge in my current work, which you may know is the movement to stop selling and start leading. Like most of my work, it's also based in research with buyers. And one thing we know from that research with buyers is that they do not want to be sold. They don't want to be sold. That's why they resist sellers. They dodge your calls. They don't return your messages. One more thing we know from buyers directly is that they do want to be led. They want to be inspired and challenged and enabled by people who are willing and able to lead them. When sellers stop selling and start leading, they are far more effective with buyers. And that's true even in the very first encounter when you are cold calling a prospect. When it comes to routine cold calling, I would have to say that yes, indeed, all those things listed on screen would be true, at least to someone who buyers are avoiding. But the activity of cold calling, when it's done artfully by someone who is clearly going to lead a buyer to a new and improved situation, well, that changes everything. For a leader, cold calling is current, essential, it's exciting, effective, and it's a high-value use of time for both parties. And that determination, it's entirely up to you. Like everything about leadership, you get to choose. In selling, you'll choose whether or not to step in and demonstrate your leadership with your buyer. Now, everything I'm saying here, it is all resting on one audacious assumption. And that assumption I'm making is that you have something you can do for the people on the other end of your call. You can help them. You're going to do good for them. In fact, you want to help and you intend to do something good for them. And if that's the case, then go ahead, dive in and do good. Don't ever be reluctant to help people and to make things better for them. With this audacious assumption that you can help them, you're ready to lead. And call reluctance is replaced by your drive, your burning desire to push for positive change. And that's because it won't feel so one-sided. You'll no longer feel like this is all about you. You won't be pushing, pitching, disturbing, annoying, interrupting, or even selling to some hapless sucker who just happens to take your call. Instead, you are about to make someone's life or job or situation better. That's the cure for call reluctance. It's also the mindset that will make you compelling and magnetic in your first encounter with a buyer. And now you're ready. These are 20 tips that apply no matter what happens on the other end of the line. You can use all 20 if you get your prospect to answer, or if you connect with a gatekeeper, and even if you end up rolling over to voicemail. Our first of the 10 tips pertain to setting the right frame of mind. And the first tip to get the right frame of mind is simple. Relax. See, if you're nervous or uptight, your voice will reveal it. So just before you dial, take a deep, calming breath and exhale slowly. This has the physiological effect of soothing you, and it forces you to talk slower and lower. That makes you sound confident. And if your adrenaline begins to race, recenter yourself on the fact that you are here to help someone. You're doing good. You have every right and even a noble purpose to be making this helpful call to offer outreach and support. So relax and keep your mind on your mission. Tip number 2 goes hand in hand with this one. This is about you. If you're sitting at a desk and staring at a computer monitor and that makes you boring and low energy, then don't sit at a desk and stare at a computer monitor. Instead, stand up, walk around a little bit, twirl in your seat, talk with your hands, do yoga poses. Seriously, do whatever you need to do in order to be comfortable so that you can be engaging. And so what if the people around you in the office are watching? Who cares? If you're more effective because you shimmy and sway while talking to buyers, then no one will be laughing for long. Of course, you can't disturb others in your workspace, so do be thoughtful, but don't let those artificial constraints prevent you from being comfortable and natural in your conversation. You can't lead without energy, so get moving if you need to. Now, before I move into the next 5 tips, I'd like to tell you that these are the 5 exemplary practices of leaders. These are evidence-based, and they're proven to make anyone who leads more effective. We know from 30 years of research that people more willingly follow those who exhibit these behaviors. If you'd like to know more about all of that research, check out the Leadership Challenge. That's the body of work by Jim Kouzes and Barry Posner. Incidentally, that's the body of work that is also the foundation for the Stop Selling and Start Leading movement, too. Now, the first exemplary practice of leadership is to model the way. Leaders lead. They model to others what they'd like to see others doing. So to lead your buyer, you'd want to give something before expecting to get something in return. This is called the law of reciprocity, and it's very powerful, and it's very easy to access and utilize in a cold call. It might sound something like this. You'd be giving sincere and simple appreciation at the very beginning of that cold call, or even in a message, and you'd say something like, "Hello, Lisa, this is Deb. Thank you so much for taking a few seconds with me today." That simple act of expressing genuine appreciation would now earn me some additional time with Lisa. I've given her appreciation. She's willing to give me just a little bit of time in a reciprocal social constraint that we all automatically play into. She's going to give me enough time to explain how I can help her, enough time to build up some additional credibility and to begin demonstrating that I'm trustworthy. As a leader, these 2 elements, credibility and trustworthiness, they must be modeled. That's because people follow credible and trustworthy individuals. If they can't believe the messenger, they'll never believe the message. As we continue adding tips, you're going to see that several of these will boost your credibility and your trustworthiness. So the second practice of exemplary leaders is to inspire a shared vision. And this is vastly different from what most sellers do. Think about the stereotypical seller. Sellers pitch. And when hyped up sellers cold call, they pitch in nonsensical ways, rapid fire, to try to cram it all in before the prospect grows impatient. Well, that's not what leaders do. Leaders don't pitch. They appeal to others by painting an exciting picture of the future. They don't offer some one-sided view of their own preconceived vision. Instead, they gather enough information to make it a shared vision, one that a buyer can see himself or herself in. Leaders who are helping people show them how their own long-term interests can be realized in that shared vision. Leaders, they speak with genuine conviction about the higher meaning and purpose of their work. For them, it's not about selling something. It's about offering those exciting possibilities to someone who can truly be helped. The third exemplary practice of leaders is to challenge the process. You know that buyers want this. You've already heard about the challenge or sale. The behaviors recommended there are not your typical selling behaviors. Those are leadership behaviors. And to be effective in cold calling, you have to immediately challenge a buyer to think bigger, to stretch beyond the status quo. That may mean stretching and challenging yourself, too. It will feel risky at first to experiment with these tips. But what do you have to lose? You might just be surprised by how refreshing your buyers are viewing your challenging of the process. Because what you're challenging is that very same stereotypical selling that they would do almost anything to avoid. All right, so let's move on to the fourth practice of exemplary leaders, and that is to enable others to act. This is a big one. Buyers are very, very clear about what they want in this regard. Let me quote two authors, Prahalad and Ramaswamy, in a book they wrote called The Future of Competition, Co-Creating Unique Value with Customers. It succinctly sums up what buyers are responding to. They say, we're entering a bottom-up economy in which consumers will migrate to businesses that allow them to be participants in the process of creating what they want. Think about that. To be participants in creating what they want, we have to make space for our buyers so they can collaborate with us. We can't pre-formulate and deliver insights unilaterally. Instead, we need to seek input from our buyers and enable them to participate in co-creating insights with us. Right in the cold call, you need to lead by enabling your buyers in those ways. Now, don't worry, some of the upcoming tips will clarify and explain how to go about doing that. But last but not least, let's cover the fifth exemplary practice of leaders, and that is to encourage the heart. And that may sound a little strange when you think about a typical seller-buyer relationship, but let's break it down. To encourage the heart means to pour courage into, to bolster the emotional response and to embolden your buyer by creating that emotional connection. Even the act of listening well can encourage the heart of your buyer. If you're affirming and encouraging versus making the transaction a win-lose proposition, you'll be encouraging the heart of your buyer. If you recognize and reward a buyer's openness and their contributions to the process versus skipping over that and failing to acknowledge each and every forward step they take with you, if you do that, you're encouraging the heart. And, we all expect this from all of our leaders. When we assume a leadership role, we should give just exactly like we would like to get that encouragement. And it's no different as you are leading your buyers. In fact, that's a good segue to tip number 8. Buyers are human, and so are you. And as a human leader versus a robot seller, you can do things differently, and you'll be far more effective if you do. Let the real, true you shine through in your cold calls. Don't rely on some script that somebody else wrote that begins to sound tired and worn out. Seems like you're reading. It's becoming a barrier between you and the buyer. Don't treat selling and cold calling like a numbers game, which will force you to race through calls and distance yourself from each and every buyer. And don't go to the opposite extreme and end up being cheesy by proclaiming some fake or exaggerated connection. All of that feels inauthentic. It doesn't feel like it's coming from a real live person, a human. Cold calling, like all of selling, is a human-to-human interaction, one where you're aiming to help your buyer. And as a human aiming to help your buyer, you want to focus less on being interesting and focus more on being interested. It's the old maxim, seek first to understand and then to be understood. In cold calling, getting your buyer to share information is always a huge step forward. So the more you talk, the less the buyer talks. That won't work. Let's flip it. Don't let your nervousness or your fear of losing that live connection get in your way. Remind yourself that you're conducting this conversation for a purpose, to help somebody. And before you can help, you need a connection with that person. And they will only connect with you if they know you're interested in them, human to human. Okay, so speaking of the aim of the cold call, let's talk about that even more directly. Tip number 10, getting into the right frame of mind. Do know your objective. Know that it's not to make a sale, not initially, and it's not to cram in your whole sales pitch rapid fire. What's the point of that? The point of a cold call is to earn more time with the buyer so that you can develop a relationship and learn more about their needs and proceed to the close of the sale later on. You've got to open it up before you can close it up. By now, I know some of you are wondering, how can you demonstrate your desire to help if the buyer won't give you time? After all, these are the very same buyers who have become conditioned by sellers who waste their time and offer no value. So we'll shift now. Let's use our last 10 tips to get a little bit more tactical and practical. In tips 11, 12, and 13, we'll talk about how to move past those instant objections that buyers make to cold calls. Starting with this one, the classic, and it's not even true. People say they don't have time, but the truth is they do. We all do have time for something that will help us. The only problem is that your buyer doesn't yet know that you're here to help. So you've got to deal with this throwaway objection, this automated response, before you can proceed. Now, if you're like most sellers, you may have a tendency to accept this objection and to try to get a callback time. If you're going to use that strategy, I'd like to recommend you do it just a little bit differently. Take command and be a leader. Say, what I have to discuss with you is very important and will help you, so let's set up a time to talk in the near future. Don't say, can I call you back tomorrow? Because it's a waste of your time to place multiple calls and to send multiple emails trying to reestablish the connection that you have right now. Seize the opportunity while you've got it. Do get an actual appointment. Send an Outlook or other appointment planner to lock it down on your buyer's calendar. And by the way, be sure to keep that appointment because your credibility is demonstrated by your actions, not your words. You should always follow up as promised if you hope to be seen as a leader. I'd like to point out that there's an alternative response. And this one fleshes out whether or not time is the only issue, or if it's just a smokescreen to make you go away. If there's a secondary objection, you're better off to get that on the table right away, and you'll also get the buyer talking by using this technique. So if the buyer says, this is not a good time to talk, you would say, oh, thank you for letting me know that. Tell me honestly, if this was a good time, would you talk with me about your needs for blank? Fill in the blank with whatever need you're going to meet, of course. And when you ask that question point blank, they're either going to say yes, and you'll make the appointment, or they'll say no and give you another reason why they wouldn't proceed with you. And then you get to probe that reason, and you're prepared to come back to that objection when you talk again. For now, though, you can simply say, it's good to know that. I'd like the opportunity to address that and to help you at the same time. When can we meet? Then there's that other common refrain, the objection that is often premature, where the buyer says, I'm not interested. Think about that for a minute. This is a cold call, your first connection, the first few milliseconds of that connection. And this is not even really an objection. It's just a statement of fact because, frankly, why should anyone be interested before you give them a reason to be? So acknowledge that. Don't be defensive. Don't ignore it. Don't talk over it. Don't try to proceed in spite of it. Instead, this is a great opportunity to connect, to have a little bit of a laugh together. I like to say something like, when they say, I'm not interested, I like to say something like, well, I understand. I wouldn't be interested either unless I knew. And then I have an opportunity to introduce some additional information that will prompt some interest and engage the prospect in some great conversation. Any other objections that you're hearing right here at the onset of a cold call, those are likely to be misperceptions. I would suggest thinking of them as invitations for information, invitations to go ahead and continue this dialogue. After all, they didn't say no and simply hang up on you. They chose to invite you into a conversation. Let's say that they tell you, I have a contract with your competitor. Well, that's an invitation to learn more about the competitor and that contract and your buyer's timeline. And as you're gathering those bits of information, you might be able to find ways to sell peripheral products or service enhancements. You'll be gathering information. You'll be connecting. You'll be demonstrating your leadership throughout all of that conversation. See, objections are openings. And you want to walk through that open door to have a real conversation. So use every objection. It's a green light, not a red light. And as you're doing that, conversationally and with great interest, you are beginning to make your prospect think more expansively. What you're doing is creating value out of thin air. And this is a big deal. See, buyers want to meet with people who help them pause, reflect, reconsider, and think. According to buyers, this is one of the highest value activities they can do with a seller, including in a cold call. And this is what leaders do. Leaders create value out of thin air just by virtue of those conversations that are challenging and enabling to others. The result of your leadership behaviors is value creation that buyers recognize and reward by spending more time with you and trusting you. And the fastest way you create value out of thin air is largely by asking quality questions. Quality questions, not fishing expedition questions, not canned needs assessment questions, but genuine, purposeful questions that are often unexpected, questions that will create value in a moment. Be sure to download the list of sample questions I've provided for you there in the attachments on your bright screen. Those are field tested. They're effective. These questions, I selected those because they are questions that buyers have specifically called out when I've debriefed with them after sales calls, and buyers viewed these in a favorable way. These questions are all used in cold calling with the very first connection, and they're just a sample of the kinds of questions and techniques you'd find in my book, Discover Questions Get You Connected. The book is available on Amazon if you want to go deeper and develop question skills that can connect you with buyers all throughout your sales process. But here in the cold call, don't neglect to ask quality questions and create value. And when you do that, there are two companion behaviors that are needed. The first is your focus, your dedicated focus on the buyer. Don't try to fool anybody. Just because you're on the phone and they can't see you doesn't mean that they won't pick up on it if you're not fully tuned in. On the phone, it's even more important to stay completely in the moment and to listen carefully for the cues that are coming through, since you can't use the visual cues that you'd otherwise have. You've got to work to be engaged and to be engaging, and that only happens if you fully focus on the person on the other end of that call. By the way, if you'd like to subscribe to this Bright Talk channel, you'll find that there's a previous webinar all about the myth of multitasking, and it gives you lots of information about how to focus in a way that will be very, very meaningful and productive for you. But the second behavior that needs to accompany questions that are asked in a cold call is that you have to actively listen. Effective leaders are really, really good at this. They work at it to be good. At a minimum, because you're fully focused, as you are actively listening and you're using all your brain power to process what you're hearing, at a minimum, be listening beyond the content of what your prospect is telling you. Listen for the feeling, the subtle cues that would signify there's some kind of feeling or emotion behind what they're saying, that something is really stressful to them or a burden, or that something's actually really making them kind of nervous about it, or that there's some sort of gravity or weight to what they're saying. Listen for the feeling. And listen also for what's different. See, you walked into this call with certain expectations. Rather than pouncing when anything that's said suggests that your expectations might be accurate, instead, don't pounce. Listen instead for what's different, for what you didn't expect to hear, for those clues and cues that make you curious. And as you're staying in the moment, that's where you would probe. Now, as we get to our last couple of tips for cold calling, let's talk specifically about gatekeepers. And then we'll come back to that question about whether or not to leave a voicemail. By the way, everything we've already talked about can also be used with gatekeepers, but I find there's something extra here. People in these roles, they tend to be highly accustomed to helping others. Many have a service orientation, and they enjoy being able to support others. If you tap into that desire to help, you might get farther with a gatekeeper. You may end up both being helped and developing an internal ally because of your willingness to help. It's reciprocal. To ask for help, have the humility to learn from the gatekeeper and to ask for help. And this, remember, it's going to be quid pro quo because you'll reciprocate by helping this company. You may even help the gatekeeper as you enable and encourage her or him too. So you'll ask for help, you'll ask for advice, you'll ask for confirmation of the research you have or the assumptions you've made, and you'll be sure to let the gatekeeper know that your intention is to help, and you'll get through by demonstrating how you're different from all those other sellers. That's not how your product is different, but how you personally are different. And I can't emphasize this point enough. It's extremely important to differentiate yourself. Don't you dare act like all those other cold call sellers. If you will stop selling and start leading, You will differentiate yourself. It's surprising just how quickly that differentiation is noticed by a buyer. When you step fully into your role as a leader, you'll exude confidence, and your intent to help will be telegraphed in a myriad of unspoken ways. As a result, you won't be dismissed like all the other sellers who are seen as interruptions and even nuisances. If you follow these tips, buyers will respond differently to you. And when they do, have some fun in your cold calling. The very best prospectors and business developers, they enjoy cold calling. They learn to enjoy it because they learn how to relax and how to follow all these tips so they will be more effective. And they find their work to be more gratifying because they're helping others. Now, the only thing remaining is to answer that burning question, should I leave a voicemail? My answer is based on observations with sellers. It's not an absolute because I have seen exceptions. But for the vast majority of us, the answer is yes. Please, leave a voicemail. Here's why. If you leave a voicemail, you're more likely to get a call back than if you don't leave a voicemail. If you leave a voicemail, your confidence, your professionalism, and your skill can shine through. And don't forget, every contact, even a voicemail contact, is a chance to differentiate yourself. So leave a quality voicemail, one that takes these 20 tips into account, one that poses a thought-provoking question that creates value and instantly differentiates you from all the other sellers who have called. And you don't have to leave numerous voicemails, but you do want to leave one or a few that build interest and awareness and brand you as a seller who is going to create value, a seller who is going to be worth spending more time with. After all, you're here to help. So, of course you're going to leave a voicemail because that's where it starts. You want to begin helping just as soon as possible. Now, I do see we have a couple of questions here. Let me see if I can take these. One is, what is the stop selling and start leading movement? Well, we didn't get to really talk a lot about that, but it is gaining momentum, and it is all about some of the things we've talked here, the behaviors of sellers and how you can become more effective with buyers. There's a lot out there. I tell you, the best thing to do to learn more about the stop selling and start leading movement is to do a simple Google search. You'll find lots of webcasts and podcasts and webinars and videos and articles out there. So just Google it by name, Stop Selling and Start Leading. I see a couple of comments here about getting the slide deck and recording. If you do subscribe here to Bright Talk, or even by virtue of attending, yes, you will be able to access this on demand. It takes about an hour after we conclude before that on-demand recording will be available. And a couple of you asked for a volume check, which I did do throughout the call, and I apologize if the volume issue was occurring and we didn't get it fixed. Well, with that, don't forget those downloads that are available to you, and don't forget the book, Discover Questions Get You Connected, on Amazon. Please do connect with me. Let me know how these tips are working for you. And if you're looking for additional sales training or coaching, let's talk. Every sale starts with a connection, and we know here at People First Productivity Solutions, we know firsthand from buyers how to make those connections. Hands down, the most common question I get about cold calling is this one: should I leave a voicemail? I hear it from sellers I coach in field, from students attending my sales course at UC Berkeley, from both experienced and new hire sales reps who attend my training programs. They all ask, should I leave a voicemail? Well, we'll get to that. But first, I want to give you 20 cold calling tips in 20 minutes And these aren't likely to be the same old tips you've heard before. There are plenty of resources available for the basics. In fact, I've compiled a list of great resources for you. You can find it in the attachment section of your Bright Talk screen, so be sure not to leave without it. But these tips, these lightning speed tips that I'm about to give you, they're from a people-first perspective. Putting people first is what we do. After all, every sale starts with a connection, a person. Cold calling, it seems like it has a tendency to overlook that critical factor. But before we dive in, let me properly is that they do want to be led. They want to be inspired and challenged and enabled by people who are willing and able to lead them. When sellers stop selling and start leading, they are far more effective with buyers. And that's true even in the very first encounter when you are cold calling a prospect. When it comes to routine cold calling, I would have to say that yes, indeed, all those things listed on screen would be true, at least to someone who buyers are avoiding. But the activity of cold calling, when it's done artfully by someone who is clearly going to lead a buyer to a new and improved situation, well, that changes everything. For a leader, cold calling is current, essential, it's exciting, effective, and it's a high-value use of time for both parties. And that determination, it's entirely up to you. Like everything about leadership, you get to choose. In selling, you'll choose whether or not to step in better. That's the cure for call reluctance. It's also the mindset that will make you compelling and magnetic in your first encounter with a buyer. And now you're ready. These are 20 tips that apply no matter what happens on the other end of the line. You can use all 20 if you get your prospect to answer, or if you connect with a gatekeeper, and even if you end up rolling over to voicemail. Our first of the 10 tips pertain to setting the right frame of mind. And the first tip to get the right frame of mind is simple. Relax. See, if you're nervous or uptight, your voice will reveal it. So just before you dial, take a deep, calming breath and exhale slowly. This has the physiological effect of soothing you, and it forces you to talk slower and lower. That makes you sound confident. And if your adrenaline begins to race, recenter yourself on the fact that you are here to help someone. You're doing good, and demonstrate your leadership with your buyer. Now, everything I'm saying here, it is all resting on one audacious assumption. And that assumption I'm making is that you have something you can do for the people on the other end of your call. You can help them. You're going to do good for them. In fact, you want to help, and you intend to do something good for them. And if that's the case, then go ahead, dive in and do good. Don't ever be reluctant to help people and to make things better for them. With this audacious assumption that you can help them, you're ready to lead. And call reluctance is replaced by your drive, your burning desire to push for positive change. And that's because it won't feel so one-sided. You'll no longer feel like this is all about you. You won't be pushing, pitching, disturbing, annoying, interrupting, or even selling to some hapless sucker who just happens to take your call. Instead, you are about to make someone's life or job or situation. Introduce myself. I'm Deb Calvert, author of the bestseller Discover Questions Get You Connected and of the award-winning blog Connect to Sell. I train and coach salespeople and sales managers about establishing and maximizing connections with buyers, and I conduct research with buyers to understand what they want from sellers. Speaking of connections, please connect with me on LinkedIn or Twitter or Google+. You'll see my handle on screen along with my email address. And I want to tell you that I also work in the leadership space as an executive coach. See, it's those two disciplines, sales and leadership, that converge in my current work, which you may know is the movement to stop selling and start leading. Like most of my work, it's also based in research with buyers. And one thing we know from that research with buyers is that they do not want to be sold. They don't want to be sold. That's why they resist sellers. They dodge your calls. They don't return your messages. One more thing we know from buyers direct